It's been said that every quilt tells a story, and it's so true. But I also believe every quilter has a story to tell. I wanted to hear about the people behind these wonderful quilts and thought you'd enjoy hearing about their lives also. Welcome to A Quilter's Life. Quilters are so wonderful, and I'm so happy to have the opportunity to get to know so many of you through this podcast. Although I had interviewed a wonderful quilter for this week's episode, I emailed her to let her know I wouldn't have the time to properly edit the episode because my mother passed away Friday, April 29th, 2022. I also had to contact another guest that I was to interview on the 29th that I will have the opportunity to interview later. You all are so kind and compassionate, yet I didn't want to miss having an episode out there for those of you that look forward to a story each week. So I decided to share a little about my mother and show you a few quilts that we worked on together. Each week I post pictures of quilts that the quilter has made on their episode page, so if you miss seeing their quilts, they're on A Quilter's Life website. And this week, I'll be posting the quilts I made with my mom. My mom, Janet Jarvis, was born and raised in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. She went to 1 year at Practical Bible Training School after high school, where she met my father. She met my grandfather once before my parents were married. My father took her home to visit his father in the hospital. My grandfather asked my dad if he had taken her to the cemetery. Well, my aunts and my grandmother laughed when my father told them what my grandfather had said. So later, Mom asked him why everyone laughed. The story was told that a man had taken a girl to the cemetery. He said, "My grandfather is buried here, and my grandmother is buried beside him." They moved to the next plot, and he said, "My father is buried here, and my mother is buried beside him." Then he turned to her and said, "I will be buried here. Will you be buried beside me?" Probably not too long after that, my father did take Mom to the cemetery, and she knew what was coming because of this story. They were married that following summer. Over the years, they worked in churches in New York, Indiana, and California. After I was in junior high school, Mom decided to get a job outside of the home. Part of the interview process for one of the jobs was putting a puzzle together. She did very well with that, so she was hired to do gift wrap in a department store. Mom sewed many of our clothes while we were growing up. It was quite usual to see her busy at her green Singer sewing machine. As I mentioned in a previous episode, Mom had me start on a quilt by cutting out rectangles using a 3x5 card as a pattern. I never finished cutting out the blocks, and I don't know what happened to them, but it never was finished. In my teen years, my family was in a terrible automobile accident. We were living in California at the time, but were traveling to New York for a family reunion when our car was hit from behind. My father was severely injured. He tried to go back to work, but because of the terrible headaches from the accident, he couldn't concentrate to do the work. Mom had to be so strong during the rest of the years taking care of Dad. I don't think she ever realized how strong she could be. In 1995, my parents moved from California to Ohio to live near me. Mom was so happy to be back near family. She also loved to have the seasons that she missed while in California. One day in the fall, she was spotted holding out her arms while the leaves were falling. She didn't realize anyone was looking. I can only picture the joy she was feeling. After my father passed away in 2009, Mom moved in with me and my husband Guthrie. This coincided with Guthrie and I moving to North Carolina. It was during this time that I fell in love with quilting. She always enjoyed seeing what I was working on, and as I mentioned, we worked on a couple quilts together. The first quilt we worked on was a blue quilt. She had cross-stitched some blocks. Then we made blocks the same size out of blue material. We laid it out on point. Since this quilt was done before I knew what we were doing, I'm sure we probably used 5/8 seams, and she tied the quilt. She was able to give this quilt to one of her granddaughters for a wedding gift. Then after I learned more about quilt making, we decided to make a quilt for her. It was such fun shopping for material together. I would cut and pin, then Mom would sew. After the top was finished, I quilted and bound it. It was a great project for us to do together. We lived in North Carolina until 2016. Then we moved back to Ohio. I realized in 2019 that it wasn't safe for Mom to continue living with us, and she moved into an assisted living facility. As most everyone knows, COVID locked down facilities across the country. It was hard to visit her at the window during much of that time. At the time of recording this episode, we haven't had the funeral yet. And at the time this episode is released, we should be on our way to New York State to bury my mother beside my father in the same cemetery where his grandparents and parents are buried. As I get to chat with my mom's friends to let them know that she is now with her Lord and Savior, they have been sharing about her. Seems like a reoccurring theme that she was such a wonderful friend, someone that would take the time to listen to what they had to say and to hold them up in prayer during difficult times. Thank you to all who have sent encouragement to me and for your prayers during this time. Quilters are the most wonderful, kind, loving people. Thanks. You can find more stories on aquilterslife.com or subscribe on your favorite podcast player so each episode will be downloaded automatically. Also, I want to hear about you and your wonderful quilts. Please contact me, Paula Chamberlain, through the website to set up an interview. And as always, thanks for listening.